Good afternoon passengers, welcome to Martel Air. My name's Amanda and I'll be your pilot for today. We're just beginning boarding for flight number 11 from Moruya to Canberra, so grab your seats while I finished up the last steps of the pre-flight inspections of the Cessna Grand Caravan, the pride of the Martel Air fleet. Before engine start checklist. Pre-flight inspection complete. Parking brake handle set. Electrical systems off. Ignition switch normal. Fuel tank selectors both on. Bleed air heat switch off. Power lever idle. Prop RPM max. Fuel condition cut off. Fuel shut off knob confirm in. Battery switch on. Cabin lights on. Cockpit lighting set. Flaps up. No smoking lights on. Before engine start checklist complete. The weather today is clear and sunny and we'll be cruising at an altitude of about 5,000 feet, flying over the town of Cooma en route. Your cabin crew today is me, and your emergency exits are located to the back of the cabin where you entered the plane. I also have a door up here by me, and if you see me leave, please follow me quickly. My co-pilot today, as always, is Wing Commander Lamington, who will be keeping an eye on the instruments for me if I get distracted by chatting. Our in-flight catering services are provided by our wonderful passengers, so I hope you packed something interesting. Engine start checklist. Battery switch on. Beacon light on. Avionics 1 on. Bus faults check. Emergency power lever normal. Inertial separator bypass, especially important as we're parked on grass at the moment. EIS readings check. Propeller area clear. Fuel boost switch on. Fuel boost on check. Fuel pressure low not shown. Fuel flow 0 check. Starter switch start. Ignition on check. Oil PSI check. NG stable. Fuel condition lever low idle. Fuel flow check. NG climbing. NG stable. Starter switch off. EIS readings check. Generator load check. Battery amps positive check. Fuel boost switch normal. Avionics 2 on. Nav lights on. Engine start checklist complete. Oh, and it looks like we have one passenger in the chat approving of checklists and dog checks. Excellent. Lovely to have some company on this flight. We're now ready for departure, so please fasten your seatbelts and turn off your devices, apart from those used to watch this stream. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Before departure, taxi checklist. Taxi lights on. Seatbelt lights on. Taxi clearance. Moruya traffic, Martel 11 is taxiing to runway 36 for takeoff. Taxi clearance check. Nav source set. Prop RPM lever minimum. Fuel condition low idle. Inertial separator handle bypass. And parking brake off. Before departure taxi checklist complete. Now, as we are parked on grass, it is going to be a little bit of an interesting taxi. I could push us backwards, or I could go forwards and just loop around this guy parked over here. And for some reason, there's a van and a bus that keep parking next to me there, which is mysterious. Although I suppose that's how you people got to the plane. Lambton, you ready for taxi? Excellent. Alright. Beginning taxi. And the plane will not want to move as we are on grass. But this is why we have a little bit more engine power and why we have the inertial separator. And yes, I have managed to make it so that we can hear from Wing Commander Lamington, because let's face it, he is the most important member of the Martel Air team. And I'll have some news on that in a little bit. Oop, pothole. I think I need to not be at minimum prop RPM just to get through this dirt. The joys of tiny country airports and airstrips. But here is some paved taxiway. So I have been working on the nav map display down in the bottom left. It was showing a nice branding purple plane icon before. It is not currently. So unfortunately we'll have to continue to deal with that being yellow. There doesn't seem to be much I can do about that, since I also had to delay the stream for flight sim technical difficulties. And this van is parked on the taxiway. What a jerk. Well, guess it's a little bit more off-roading for us. Look at this asshole. Right on the intersection. Now, unfortunately, Moruya does not have a taxiway from that parking to the runway we're using. Moruya traffic, Martel 11 is entering the inactive runway for taxi. That was the number of this one. And there's a bus on this too. You know what? Let's play chicken. I got a whirling death blade. Yeah, I think we're very popular in Moruya and they just do not want us escaping. Lamington, do you owe them money? Did not see that plane announcing their approach on the channel. They really don't want us leaving. What is this guy doing? I'm just going to take off from this intersection. Before takeoff checklist, parking brake set, altimeter set, standby flight instruments check, fuel boost switch normal, fuel tank selectors both on, fuel shut off knob confirm in, fuel quantity check, standby alt power on, anti-ice system not required at 22 degrees, inertial separator handle normal, autopilot altitude set for initial cruise, and setting this up we'll get that guy out of the way, altitude set, flight level change mode engaged, and flight level change set to VY, heading set to runway heading, heading mode engaged, bank mode engaged, transponder on alt, flaps to takeoff position, strobes on, landing lights on, seatbelt light on, parking brake release, proper PM to max, fuel condition high idle. Before takeoff checklist complete. And this guy is going to be taking off before us. So we will let his tiny little 2 to 4 seater thing get out of our way. You gotta actually accelerate though. If you're trying to taxi along here, you're gonna have a bad time. Yeah, if he's trying to taxi along here, I think. No? No, just stopping before he takes off. How ridiculous. Okay. Moruya traffic, Martel 11 taking off from runway 36 for a departure to the west. Okay. And luckily this thing does not need the entire length of the runway. So we can do an expedited intersection takeoff. centre, Martel 11 is type Cessna Caravan, 1 mile north of Moruya, 700 feet, request flight following. Squawk 5773, Martel 11. Confirm radar contact, UNH 3029, Martel 11. Okay. I've been noticing the last couple of times with my non-stream flights that Moruya has been getting to be a bit of a busy little airport in the sim at the moment, which is absolutely delightful. But wanting to be on this part of the coast is just objectively correct. And now we turn down towards our navigation path. And here we go, the lovely, ridiculously dense forests of the New South Wales south coast. And after a fair few streams, we now leave the south coast behind us and head back inland. Which, won't that be exciting? Now, we'll be approaching Canberra from the south this time instead of from the direct east as we have previously, at least partially because I think that if I'm ever repeating a start and end point, I will not repeat the route in the middle. So the driving route would take us past Bateman's Bay, Braidwood and Bungendore, all lovely little towns. But the inland route we'll be taking, we'll be going east. We'll be going west to the town of Cooma, which is essentially, if you're in Canberra and you just start driving south and run out of civilization, it's the next bit of major civilization you'll eventually find again. And there we have a nice view of the airports that we've just escaped. And south further to Turos and all of the memories that I was rambling about last week. And Piney Tree is getting excited about the number of trees. You would be sticking out a little bit around here because this is solid eucalypt forest. And when I say solid, I mean incredibly dense. Sometimes, you know, a tree every 60 centimeters, maybe a meter. Some of them 20 meters tall at that density. Especially on the hills and mountains as we come back from the coast into the plateaus just past the mountains, where it goes flat again but up more. Okay, and I'm checking 7 different things as I do. If I open this up, will it open on the right screen? Yes. Climb checklist. Anti-ice not required. Inertial separator normal. Prop RPM set to 1850. Power lever set to 95. Temperature range check. I have been doing more work on my checklists. The printed one is not yet updated because there's so many more changes to do, and then working out how to format it to keep it to 2 pages. The other option is I work out that I'm going to switch to a whole bunch of A5 and just get myself a little folder to flip through. The flipbook checklists do have a certain appeal to them, I must admit. Of course, that would mean getting both an A5 display book and some nice A5 paper. But let's face it, it's me. I'm going to do the fancy thing at some point. And we are at cruising altitude, as much as we're getting up this time. So, cruise checklist, seatbelt light off, anti-ice system not required, inertial separator normal, power lever 87, set, prop RPM 1750, set, fuel balance check, ITT check. So that ITT thing that I keep having to check is inter-turbine temperature. It is the temperature basically in the middle of the big spinning turbine that's spinning the fan at the front of this. And the interior of that is currently 520 degrees Celsius, which is toasty. But it is below the 740 degrees that I'm allowed to hold it at. And the in cruise, I'm not allowed to take it above 805, and in climb, I'm not allowed to take it above 825 because, don't melt your engine, please. It will start throwing chunks of engine into the fuel and oil systems. And fun, like, niche mechanical engineering fact, engines don't work well when they're trying to disassemble themselves and become metal shavings inside their own oil sumps. I don't know if you know that. It's actually true of car engines too. Just a little really obscure niche fact for you there. So, coming along nicely, I am going to make sure that relative terrain mode is on the map view there, just in case I get a little bit too close to things. We'll be flying much lower than the 8,000 we came down to Moruya with on the first trip. Just because I think it'll be more interesting for this return flight, and Cooma is essentially one end of a really long valley that points back at Canberra, so we can have some fun skating along that. In my non-passenger flights, I've been doing some work on my manual flying, including some quite low-level flights. I did Canberra to Goulburn, staying under 400 feet from the terrain, usually under 300. It was exciting, brisk. I don't know how much conversation you'd get out of me if I was doing that on stream, because I was concentrating quite a lot. And the other thing I've been doing is working on the Caribou that I've been talking about for a few streams now. So the paint job for the Martel Air Freight Caribou is now just about complete. I've been doing some finishing touches on what sort of paint job I want on that. And I've also been working out how to fine-tune the Microsoft Flight Sim files for this plane so that I can fix up a couple of small errors that it has. I have, of course, fixed the most glaring error in that it does not show the co-pilot when looking from inside the cockpit, and that is just absolutely unacceptable for someone to be left out. So I have fixed that error, and we will now be able to fly the de Havilland Canada Caribou with our important first officer co-pilot. It is an exciting plane to fly at certain times. It has no autopilots. It has a basic GPS and radar altimeter that have been retrofitted, but it is steam gauges and not this fancy glass cockpit. So, at some point, we'll be doing a few episodes where the passengers will be accompanying their packages as we fly on Martel air freight. It is a joyful plane, especially now that I've got it working more to my liking. Okay, landing lights are off at this point. The problem with the Caribou is that it's locked down by DRM when you buy it on the marketplace, so it's been tricky to work around and do certain modifications on it, but I am very clever. Now, these little mountains and valleys here are exceptionally fun to fly with, staying below the ridge lines. That is not sensible flying, but if you want to do something silly, and perhaps there'll be an episode that is just a tribute to Avangel, who is another YouTuber with, an actual audience and following that does plane reviews and bush flights, and doing the ridiculous flying down through all of these little crinkly bits and valleys, which perhaps will take the Caribou on a trip to somewhere complicated that involves flying like Avangel at some point. Oop. Little bit of turbulence there. Now, of course, the most difficult part of transferring from the Caravan to the Caribou is remembering that you have landing gear. Because this thing has just solid, like, there's a wheel just out there, and it doesn't pull up. And the Caribou's gear does retract. Most planes do, in fact, have gear that retracts. It's a bit of a trade-off, and I'm going to ramble about the engineering things around that now. But, yeah, you have to remember to put your gear down when you're coming into land, and you have to remember to pull it up when you take off. Because the thing about landing gear, and why you still have planes with gear that doesn't retract. Basically, there are two options when attaching wheels to a plane. Because you need them a certain distance from the body of the plane just to, keep the engines off the ground between propellers or jet engines with the big pods under the wing. You need to have that not scrape the ground. You need to have the wingtips not catch the ground first. So, you put the wheels at the bottom, but you put them like a bit more at the bottom than you would on a car. And you also need them to be springy. You have shock absorbers and that sort of thing. So if you want the gear to be able to retract, you have to do a whole bunch of engineering to have wheels that stick down far enough and are wide enough to cushion the landing, especially if you have a hard landing. Let's say between crap pilots and just sudden wind changes and emergencies, you get hard landings sometimes, so you need a certain amount of ability to absorb that. But if it's going to retract, you have to also be able to fault that mechanism away. The other option is you just have them just sticking out and a little bit, as streamlined as you can. And then you can just do a much lighter weight version of how you make it springy and stick down enough. So you look at a 747's landing gear, you've got these giant shock absorber struts and a whole mechanism to move them into exactly the right angle and then hold them there through the landing forces. But given that 747s will generally cruise at Mach 0.87. You do need to be able to pull it up and get it out of the airflow. I just had a message that there is a plane flying past somewhere that I have to keep an eye out for. Traffic not in sight, Martel 11. I cannot see them at all. No. I was in the middle of a tangent. Shock absorbers. So, the other option is, like on the Caravan, what you do instead of... Can't actually see it from the cockpit, which is a little bit annoying. Instead of having all of these complicated mechanisms and shock absorbers and all this sort of thing, instead you just work out how flexible the strut that it's sitting on needs to be, and you engineer it to be that level of flexible. So the nose wheel of the Caravan has those complicated struts and pistons and all this sort of stuff because it needs to be able to turn. This is one of those planes that does its ground handling by nose wheel steering, so it needs to be able to turn, so it has to have the complicated engineering bits. It also has a system for absorbing forward impacts, so that if you hit the nose first, if you're taxiing and you hit a pothole or a small, like a curb or something, then the nose wheel is able to flex out of the way instead of snapping off, which would be bad. But the main wheels, as they are called, the back ones out to each side, they are just on flexible rods made of complicated engineering materials, but basically aluminium and fiberglass, and a nice grip pad step in one spot. I'll quite possibly ramble about this a little bit once we've landed and I can show you the outside, since it's harder to show the outside while we're flying because don't climb out of a plane at 5,000 feet and 120 knots. That's a bad idea. Just another little, like, niche, obscure fact that's sometimes incorrect. The Caribou is designed so that you can leave it at 120 knots. The Grand Caravan is not. Actually, I think it sometimes is. This one is... Okay, do not do that at 5,000 feet over 3,500 to 4,000 foot terrain. I just remembered that the Caravan is also set up such that you can open the cargo door in flight and do a parachute drop from it, just because these are used by some of the commercial parachute clubs if you need something that'll take a few people up and then not land with them. The Caribou is designed to do it with about 28 people who are all armed. So, you know, a little bit more exciting of a system in the Caribou. But anyway, don't leave planes unless you've got a parachute and the altitude to open it. Okay, there are ways that you can do a parachute drop from this altitude as well. I'm just finding all these little tangents to, well, technically myself out of every sensible statement I make. I was talking last week about the method of unloading a Caribou where you attach a parachute to a cable to a pallet and then you throw the parachute out the back and it grabs the pallet and takes it with it. There are actually some military techniques for parachuting special ops people that essentially do the same, but with heavily armed people. They are terrifying and can go very wrong. They're often done for inserting people to somewhere they shouldn't be, just off the coast, in fact, because water is slightly less awful for those landings. Slightly. It's still dreadful. But, yeah, every single point I've made, I think I've managed to contradict. One thing I can say with certainty is that despite it often being not recommended, corgi co-pilot's absolutely necessary. Exactly. This has been, so far, one of the more tangenty streams we've had so far. I blame the fact that it is currently migraine season, so one of the things that slips for me when I have a migraine is my ability to hold back the constant deluge that is normally just held back behind the eyes. And the longer that there is no comment in chat to distract or direct me, the further into what my ramblings will probably get. So that's fun. So with the slight expansions to the Martel air fleet, so we've got the Grand Caravan here that is the mainstay of our passenger flights and will definitely be the main plane that I am flying for these streams. We've got the de Havilland Caribou sitting in the hangar waiting for us when we do some freight flights after I've done a lot more. I mean, I'm getting a hang on flying it now, and I've worked out how to modify a few things on it to just fix up those little errors in simulation. I just need to finish my set of checklists for it. They will be checklist-heavy episodes when I'm flying the Caribou. It uses two of an engine type called the Twin Wasp, which was developed in World War II. It is a 14-cylinder radial engine, so that cartwheel in the chat is actually even more appropriate for that, because a radial engine is one where instead of being in a line and having a crankshaft that goes along them, you just have a single attachment point to the crankshaft and a star of cylinders around it, radially, you might say. And they are always odd numbers of cylinders, so that you can, if you fire every other cylinder as you go around. So when it's an odd number, you fire, 1, 3, 5, 7, 2, 4, 6, 1. So in 2 circuits, you'll fire each cylinder once. I said that the Caribou has 2 14-cylinder engines, didn't I? Well, the twin in Twin Wasp radial engine is the fact that it is essentially 2 7-cylinder radial engines bolted together. So, it's a little bit deeper, but not trying to make the star wider by cramming in more cylinders around the radius. Another little obscure engineering fact. Things that are longer fly better than things that are wider in general. Except for wings, but wings are weird. Wings are the bit that slows you down as well as pushes you up. But, so yes, it has 2 sets of two seven-cylinder radial engines. It's quite ridiculous. Each of the engines is about twice the horsepower as the single turbine in this, but they are cantankerous and less automated. And we are just going to drop down to about 4,000 feet from here as we come in over the little town of Cooma. As we see, the little town in the brown parts of the flat with flat bits bordering the flat with crinkly bits. And here we see that valley that points us to Canberra. Now, one of the types of plane that is popular in the simming world for people who, especially among people who are actually making models, is military planes. Now, despite the irony of the rest of the Martel air fleet other than this thing, I don't actually want to fly any of these military planes. They're, oh yes, they're very butch, but kind of dull. Yes, guns go brr, bombs go boom, missile go whoosh. Hooray! They're also very fast, which, you know, there's something nice about flying at a sensible speed over this countryside, and that means I don't need to pick quite as long a route to get the same amount of streaming time out of it. Now, the irony of that statement is the two other planes that I consider part of the Martel air fleet. So, the de Havilland Caribou is originally a military transport plane, but the key part there is transport. We will be flying what I can... The Caribou of the Martel air fleet will be a military surplus plane, as these were retired from Royal Australian Air Force service in 2009, which is ridiculously late. And it's not a plane that does anything military really, other than landing in places no plane should land to drop off and pick up cargo. I've rambled before about the ridiculous short takeoff and landing performance of the Caribou, and I'm going to have so much fun showing that off to you all. I think the Martel Air freight flights might actually be round trips, I've just realised, which will result in longer streams, of course, but I'm just going to double check. Good. This was accidentally set to top chat, not live chat, but luckily there's not been anything that I've not seen because of that. Because, you know, there's half a window of chat total so far. That's fine. Just worried I might have missed something there. Anyway, yeah, so the Martel Air freight flights might be, you know, longer round trips. So, you know, we'll do Canberra to Gabo Island Lighthouse that we were circling a couple of streams ago, and that I was utterly delighted by its ridiculous tiny runway. Plenty of runway for a Caribou, by the way. It can do it in about half that runway if I'm careful with the aim. Good to know that you are still here and enjoying. I will continue rambling then. And the other plane that I'm looking at as being in or adjacent to the Martel Air fleet is actually the one I was talking about before the Caribou. And that is, again, continuing the irony, the Fokker triplane that I've designed an Australian Flying Corps colour scheme for. So, that one, that one does not hit my but military plane sensibilities, because it is a century-old more than a century, like 108-year-old, 107-year-old military plane. And Well, yes, it's a military livery as would be used by the Australian military in World War One, but it's not one that ever actually existed, and it is specifically designed as an airshow replica. So the model from the Gottfried's company, who are also the one who did the modelling for with Commander Lamington here, the modelling for that does include guns which can be made to make noise and do the flashy lights. I consider that to be part of the airshow replica thing, because when you're flying over the airshow crowd, making the guns able to do the rat-a-tat-boom noise that is so interesting and exciting and butch and dead manly and such things is that's just part of the show. It's an airshow replica, and unlike the rest of the Martel air fleet, which is in my head based in Canberra, because I don't think it's leaking too much personal information to say that that's also where I happen to be. But the Fokker triplane of Martel Air is based in Temora, which is on my list of places to go back to. We did a flight to Temora, I believe, yes. That was one of the earlier flights. Lovely. And the reason it's based at Temora is that's where one of the biggest collections of flying extant and replica warbirds is, where warbird is the plain people name for deeply obsolete military aircraft. So, you know, it's the sort of place that has Spitfires and such. So I think, considering it to be based in Temora with the Temora Aviation Museum as one of the flying airshow replica exhibits, I think that's an appropriate thing to do. So now that I've actually got that livery completed, and it was such a fun project to research, the next leg of the flights might actually be a trip out to Temora, which I believe is one flight away from Canberra. And the next flight from Temora will in fact be just around the skies over Temora in a Fokker triplane painted in Australian Flying Corps World War One livery. And I think what I'll do for that is, instead of just rambling and doing the nice cruise flights and that sort of thing, which I have flown that plane from Canberra to Moruya and back a couple of times, just to... It's really good practice for manual handling of an aircraft, which the Caravan does not enforce. The Fokker triplane, whose pilot assistance technology includes having a compass that I'm pretty sure is from your pocket, and having an engine so you don't have to get out and push. That's as far as the pilot assistance goes, really. It doesn't even have the full standard 6 instruments, which makes a lot of flying very interesting. So really good for training your manual flying and your manual navigation, because its navigation technology is the compass. Yes, a whole engine, mostly. And actually, back to the radial engine ramble from before, it's actually got an interesting variant on a radial engine called a rotary engine. These are not used anymore because of their massive problems, but essentially, with a radial engine, you bolt the engine to the airframe, and you bolt the propeller to the drive shaft coming out of the engine. this is sensible. The engine holds onto the plane and spins the propeller. On a rotary engine, you bolt the crankshaft, you bolt the drive shaft to the airframe, and you bolt the propeller to the engine. So the entire engine spins. The main advantage of this is that it doesn't need much in the way of cooling systems, because it's spinning through the air at rapid pace and cooling itself. And yes, I see your why, and yeah, why. And also, if you have problems with unreliable engine firing, having the entire engine spinning gives you a heck of a flywheel for keeping the engine spinning while the other cylinders catch up and override the misfire. Whereas if you've just got the propeller and a metal stick spinning, then it's not got quite as much rotational inertia to keep itself spinning. So, you know, it does have its advantages, and also they look really cool. Like when the engine starts up, the engine goes blurry as well as the propeller. It's wild. Now, the disadvantage of this is, did you know that engines need fluids? Several of them. And piping fluids into a spinning thing is complicated. I'm just full of obscure niche engineering facts today, aren't I? Putting fluids into a spinning thing is hard. I mean, the harder bit is getting any of them back out again. Well, getting them back out again in a useful manner. So, they actually have quite good fuel pressure regulation, because the fuel is pushed into the cylinders by centrifugal force instead of just pump pressure, which is really handy. So, you know, they keep good fuel pressure in the connections apart from any leaks at the joint between the spinny bit and the hose. But in most oil systems for engines, the oil circulates through the engine and then back out to the sump that is the holding tank for more of it to come back in. You can't do that with a rotary engine. Also, there are two things called a rotary engine. One of them is the spinning radial, and the other is weird triangle maths modern engine. This is the weird spinny old one. They stopped using them just after World War I, basically. So, rotary engines have what is called a total loss oiling system. You can put oil into the cylinders and such to keep the mechanism lubricated. That's no harder than putting the fuel in. But cycling the oil, getting the oil back out of the cylinders is again quite easy. It's centrifugal force again, and then it's gone. It's just been flung out of the engine completely. And these aren't enclosed because the airflow over the spinning cylinders is the cooling system. So yes, a total loss oiling system. The oil that you put in does not circulate, it just flies out of the engine at a controlled rate. This is one of the reasons that pilots in World War I wear goggles. There are, in fact, a number of fascinating health problems for World War I pilots, including one of the lubricants used as well. Like, when we say oil now, we often think of... We almost always think of a petroleum product. Going to 125.9er, Martel 11, goodbye. Canberra approach, Martel 11 is at 4,000 feet. Sorry, ATC interruption there. So, we think of petroleum products when we think of oil for engines. World War I, they were often actually using a thing called castor oil for engines on planes. So this is a plant product, lovely natural stuff. It's actually used in medicine as well. Castor oil is really useful from a medical standpoint as a laxative. A lot of World War I pilots spent every flight being continuously splashed with hot castor oil, which, other than the obvious effects of a total loss oiling system of starting to run out of oil, there was another limit on the flight time for a lot of World War I pilots, as another total loss system tried to kick in. I'm not going to paint you a picture, but I can tell you that it would be using a quite brown palette. Now, I'm quite sure that the Martel Airshow replica is using much safer, non-castor, probably petroleum-based oils for its engine. And yes, you would be painting a landscape picture with this total loss system. Look, my 7-year-old kid watches these streams every so often. You've got to put some poop jokes in. Also, poop jokes are funny. So yes, the Martel Airshow replica of the Fokker triplane will not be using a castor oil in its total loss oiling system. Let's just not speculate. That would not be a stream I would be able to publish. There are certain people who would be able to publish that stream. I'm not going to follow that mental image any further, as much as it's trying to chase me. So how about that landscape? Look, we have the flat with up bits. A lovely set of, it's probably still more eucalypts here. Exceptionally flammable trees. And yes, in Australia we would consider these mountains, as much as certain other continents would mock us for that. Why are they called gum trees? I've got to assume that it's... I've got to assume it's from them being used to make some product. I am currently looking that up on the other screen. Many species, though by no means all, are known as gum trees because they exude copious kino from any break in the bark. Yes, that is a thing I know about them. There is So a lot of eucalypts, the subset that are gum trees, as it were, if you scratch the bark or break off any of the bark, I think this is actually the southern tip of Canberra. Yes, it is. You get what we always just considered tree sap and tried to use to make amber like Jurassic Park. But you get this really thick, like let's do some overflight of Canberra on the way in. You get this really thick gummy resin coming out of any break in the bark of the tree. And yeah, apparently the eucalypts which make that resin from any break in the bark are the ones that are gum trees, the ones that make gum. Oh yes, the California eucalypts. California tried to sue the Australian government over that one ages ago. And yes, the flammability of eucalyptus oil and eucalyptus oil infused trees is quite terrifying when you get a lot of them together. Like when you have an entire forest the length of a country made of these. And yes, the lawsuit was, we imported these trees and you didn't tell us they were that flammable. And yeah, turns out they're not just flammable, they're explosive. So, this end of Canberra, the southern tip, is called Tuggeranong. I'm pretty sure that will be from an Indigenous word. I cannot remember what it means, but included in Tuggeranong we have Lake Tuggeranong, which is ever so exciting. They imported them for agricultural windbreaks. That's poor planning. I would not have done that. Especially considering that they don't usually have much in the way of branches at the base. You want things like poplar, which are like bushy all the way up, not just at the top. That is, even without the explosives, that's bad planning. Okay, let's take this off autopilot, because I'm just going to do a tour of Canberra with, based on what I can remember of places I've been and can identify from the air. So, over here we have south side, southern central Canberra, I can't remember. Look, we just call that bit like inner south. And over here, this should be Woden, I think. No, that might be Western Creek, and this is Woden. This is Woden, I think. Look, if we were driving, I would be this is Woden. If we were driving, I'd be much more sure of things, but I think, that's Hindmarsh. So, this is the little area where my rheumatologist is. Very important. Which means that one behind us is Western Creek. So, Canberra is a designed city. Okay, so, and here is the inner south, and Lake Burley Griffin. And so Canberra is a designed city. These are the major regions that are clusters of suburbs are planned developments. And in fact, I would probably not be allowed to be flying quite right here, because that is the Australian Parliament House. And that weird triangle-y thing on top of it is an utterly ridiculous flagpole. It is bigger than you think. That building is huge, and it towers over it. So yes. And yes, Canberra is the city of roundabouts, and there's the roundabout it's on. It's actually massive. And yeah, that flagpole is disturbingly big. So that is Parliament House. And then this little Art Deco office block directly in line from it is Old Parliament House. So New Parliament House took over about the year I was born. Essentially the first one that they built in the 20s was utterly inconsequentially sized compared to what it would later be. And they were just way too cramped. It was originally all of government was stored in that one little building. It's now the Museum of Australian Democracy, which is quite appropriate. And here we have the lovely crushed granite centre line of Anzac Avenue, and then the Australian War Memorial, which is that lovely domed building there, which is currently being redeveloped as far as museum things go. So it is a museum of military things, and they're currently working on a big redesign and massively improving the curation and making it a proper museum, not just a collection of interesting things. And this mountain here, which, you know, there is a reason I got quite close to flying straight at it, is Mount Ainslie. And that is... So there's a lookout on top of Mount Ainslie, which is lovely views. And there is a particular spot on Mount Ainslie that the centre of the dome on the Australian War Memorial, the central flagpole of Old Parliament House, and the central giant flagpole of New Parliament House all perfectly line up. I believe Old Parliament House is off by about an inch. And given how long ago these placements were made, it's actually quite impressive. So you get this lovely view from the top of Mount Ainslie, over the War Memorial, down Anzac Parade, over the lake, through Old Parliament House to New Parliament House. It's really well designed. It's one of those things that is just, being a planned city, you can do that sort of thing. So when Australia was founded, they had to pick, where are we putting the capital? And the two big cities, Melbourne and Sydney, were arguing. So they decided, okay, we'll make the secret third option. That has to be... So Melbourne got to be the temporary capital until Canberra was online, as it were. And then the new capital was placed in New South Wales, so the state Sydney is in, but not within 100 miles of Sydney, and not within cannon range of the battleship cannon range of the coast, which is ridiculous, and I love it. And here we have Kingston Foreshore and Fyshwick, which is one of the industrial and commercial only suburbs. No residential stuff allowed in Fyshwick at all. Yes, Canberra is similar to DC, but less badly planned and actually has some rights. But, you know, that's a whole debate. And one of the other things that I was going to show you... Actually, there's a couple of cool monuments just here while we are circling Canberra. So in this cluster of buildings just here, you can see the two square hollow ones, and then a pole. On top of that pole, I don't know how well they've modelled it in Flight Sim, we'll find out. They've not. They've just modelled the fact that there's a pole there. It's massive, by the way. There is a lovely big Art Deco eagle. Now the problem with Art Deco eagles is that they look a little bit 1930s German sometimes, but that is the Australian American War Memorial. The body of the eagle faces Parliament House, and the head of the eagle faces the American Embassy off in the distance. And it has these lovely big Art Deco wings pointing straight up. So its usual nickname is Bugs Bunny. Australians are just like that. It's actually really good if you're slightly lost and then you see, oh yeah, there's Bugs Bunny, I know vaguely where I am now. And the various light agriculture. These big circles off in front of us are in fact a grass farm. The grass farm they are circles because they have the big rotary watering things for when you want to buy some grass. They have dreadful grass puns on all of their signage as you go past. It's the only reason I think of that place at all, and I love it so much. And the other thing is the National Carillon, which I understand from some people being pedants and technically correct that there's no second I in Carillon and it's actually Carillon, but we all call it the Carillon. It is, they've actually modelled it reasonably. It is that weird a shape. It is this tower on Carillon Island, and there is just a footbridge out to it. So that is a standalone bell tower. It is so pretty, and you can have lovely fun picnics there. And making sure to not crash the plane. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Grass like turf, as in if you want a new instant lawn. They grow these big fields of very neat grass and then sell it to you in pieces, like little rolls, which is always hilarious to see. Would you like some carpet, but you have to keep it alive? So yes, and there's the airport out in front of us, which we'll get back to. And fun fact, this lake is actually artificial. So, I was rambling about Carillon Island, but I have other things to ramble about. One of the this entire lake is artificial and was put there for decorative purposes. And before it got going, the big picnic spot was this roundabout just here. So that has like a 20-degree down slope towards the pond in the bottom of that roundabout, which is terrifying when you're driving, because it's like if you go straight ahead through this roundabout, not only are you off the road, you're down a slope into a pond, which is utterly ridiculous. But apparently, before Lake Burley-Griffin was established, and before the traffic was anywhere near what it is now, that was actually a picnic spot. It's now right on one of the busiest roads. I am just flying out along the lake a little bit to get us a nice smooth turn back for the next thing I'm going to show off. One of my favourite places to take some people, which is the National Museum of Australia. We have a fair few museums in Canberra because the two major industries in Canberra are the government and tourism, especially for school groups who have to come and visit the national political and government sites, you know, you got to do your civics courses. But this cluster of buildings just past us on the lake on this little delightful promontory is the National Museum. And you can see this weird, colourful, slopey thing that looks almost like a roller coaster. Yeah, it is that shape and it is that big. And fun fact, it is that angular. That's not Flight Sim making it look more angular than it is. It's just they've made it big and square so that you think you could drive a car along it and do cool tricks. But no, it's just a big, decorative, angular loop that looks like bad CGI in real life. And the entire, like, most of the walls of the National Museum are actually covered in giant braille panels, which is one of the most ironic and hilarious and stupid decisions I've ever seen. 10-foot tall braille letters a couple of stories up on a wall. Blind accessibility at its finest. It's actually a really nice museum. They have a really nice collection of Australian Indigenous stuff. Oh, and as we come past, the building that looks like a Roman temple is the National Library.
500.
And the building that is just directly there was the High Court that we just buzzed a little low. They have some braille, like, for signage and stuff, yes, but not like captions of, here's what our wall says. It's just... Oh, and they also had to censor the braille on the walls because it contained some statements of essentially apology to the Australian Indigenous community. And the government of the time was not having it. So, you know, that tells you some things about government and bureaucracy. And then the area we're flying over is called Civic. It was originally a Civic Centre in the naming of Canberra because, you know, there was also going to be Market Centre, but now Civic is just like the main town-wide CBD, and Americans do not have the word CBD, Central Business District, as a standard abbreviation, I've been told. So, downtown. That is just the main downtown. And over here we have a building I've rambled about before, Black Mountain Tower. Modernly called Telstra Tower because corporate sponsorships. I am not calling it that. The mountain that Black Mountain Tower is on is Black Mountain. And all of those weird things you can see hanging off Black Mountain Tower is half of Canberra's mobile telecommunications infrastructure. And there's a revolving restaurant that does not currently revolve as far as I'm aware, but is used as like a corporate offsite meeting horror place. And yes, I am familiar with the other meaning of CBD. And here is one of the roads that I am almost entirely familiar with, which is a little bit weird to be flying over. And we have... So basically the Black Mountain side away from Civic is the Australian National University, ANU, which is the one I went to. The bit closest to us is the nuclear physics research area, and I once took a wrong turn and ended up there completely lost. It looks exactly like a nuclear physics area should. This 3 weird hexagons building There is the Coombs building. It is the worst thing to navigate that I have ever encountered in my life, and I hate it. Each of those 3 hexagons is on a different level, so each of them is like half a floor different to the one it's connected to, and I hate it so much. And there is one other building that I'm really hoping that they've modelled, but I'm not going to be able to find it and fly safely, so we'll possibly do another Canberra tour later. I'm hoping that the Canberra tour and local ranting is at least somewhat interesting. Before, where we had the inner south, we now have the inner north, including Lynham and such places. That basically goes to the lake. The Lake Burley Griffin is the line between north and south in Canberra, and it is a mentally challenging line to cross, because that means you're going so far away if you have to cross the lake. It's terrible. Never cross the lake, it's dreadful there. All the people on the wrong side of the lake there, they're very strange. And here we have Belconnen and Lake Ginninderra. Belconnen has such highlights as where my office would be if I ever actually went into the building, and the University of Canberra, whose residences we're just flying over. They're the weird looking buildings. University of Canberra is the other university in Canberra. There is a local legend that Canberra University, usually abbreviated to UC, was originally going to be the Canberra University of New Technologies. I am not going to abbreviate that for you. And the other local legend that is related was the Canberra University netball team. Again, I'm not abbreviating it for you, but I invite you to speculate. I do not know how true these are. These are the local legends. And your oh no is correct. Yes. And we have some delightful, endless, fairly wide-spaced suburbia, and so many roundabouts. The individual suburbs do their best to be quite walkable, but given that Canberra is essentially structured as 6 towns with bush in between them, getting between any of them is more of a challenge if you're not driving. Or, flying slightly recklessly. And around Lake Ginninderra here, there are some lovely picnic spots. Oh look, more roundabouts! Canberra loves roundabouts. I think Americans call them traffic circles. We have more roundabouts than traffic lights in Canberra. And yeah, you have... So there are new developments going in here at the moment. Oh yeah, Canberra at least has so many roundabouts that you get practiced at them. They're actually fairly good. It's give way to the people upstream of you on the roundabout and use your indicators. So in Australia you give way to the right, so it would be to the left in America, but basically if they're on the roundabout already, they have right of way, and if they're going to get to the roundabout before you, then they count as being on the roundabout. And just coming up here, we have Gungahlin Lake, or Lake Gungahlin, I'm pretty sure. There is a lovely little restaurant down here at the corner called Gungahlin Lakes. It is a golf club and labour club, which is the whole category of Australian restaurant thing, and the town centre of Gungahlin, which I find the modelling of fairly fascinating. This is the new end of town, and so 20, 30 years old at this point, but still being developed. The towers are new. And there we have YMRY Pond, lovely little place. That giant wind tower in the middle of everything there, there is a wind tower there, it's about an eighth of that size. That is flight sim being stupid. It's wild. But yes, here is Gungahlin, the extent of north. Oh, there is also the small village of Hall, which I think is just on the Canberra side of the border. But I'm not going there. But there you go, a quick flying tour of Canberra. And now we work out what we are. I believe the next step will be a landing. So we find Canberra Tower. And luckily, I know where the oh yeah, he's keeping watch. Okay, the use of the B in Lamington is adorable. I don't mean to correct your spelling, but it's adorable. And I am just going to do a proper general aviation approach to Canberra Airport instead of trying the GPS-based one, just because I've been hand flying for a bit and I'm fairly comfortable with that. So, Lamington, spelled like that just without the B. No sheep involved. Although, if you made one with like a pale vanilla flavoured icing underneath the coconut, it could look like a sheep. That would be Lamington with a B. Sounds tasty, actually. Canberra Tower, Martel 11, is 6 miles north, 3,600 feet, with information Yankee to land. Enter left traffic, runway 35, Martel 11. I think corgis are a herding breed. I cannot remember. I think they actually are sheep. You don't put corgis with cattle. Also, you don't put them with horses. Never put a herding dog with horses. They get kicked really hard. I cannot remember if corgis are herding sheep or herding cattle. My image of a sheepdog is a blue heeler. Having never... Yes, please do Google it. I would be if I was on autopilot, as I did with Gumtree before. And here we come into the left traffic pattern. And there is our runway. So, seatbelts on, landing lights on. Okay, approach checklist, seatbelt lights on, fuel tanks both on, condition to high idle, prop RPM to max, flaps to approach position, landing lights on, brakes off, approach checklist complete. you know what? I have enjoyed this bit of extra hand flying. I've been doing so much autopilot while I ramble, which, I mean, there we go, cattle dogs. Because they have that, like, nip at the heels attitude that a small thing needs to move a big thing. Which is why you don't put them with horses. Horses' response to that is kick. And horses can send a much bigger dog than a corgi flying. And yes, the nipping at the heels is where heelers come from. Cleared to land, runway 35, Martel 11. Sorry, getting interrupted by traffic control chat there. We're going to fly out on downwind a little bit further. Oh yeah, horses are, what if you gave a couch anxiety and a death wish? But yes, herding dogs that nip at the heels to control their animals is in fact where blue heelers get their name. And the blue heeler that I feel is most famous at the moment would be young Miss Bluey Heeler, the Blue Heeler, aka Bluey, who is one of Australia's finest exports at the moment, and I am so pleased with getting American kids to speak with a bit more Australian, because we've been getting Australian kids speaking with a bit more American for decades. Attention passengers, we're now approaching Canberra Airport, and I've switched on the seatbelt lights, which I should have done quite some time ago, and means I'd like you to fasten your seatbelts. Enjoy this riddle and more as we come in towards landing, and thank you again for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. And turning base leg. Yes, doing this extra bit of hand flying has actually been very satisfying. After doing so much, I am flying sensibly like an adult carrying real passengers, which means as much autopilot as possible. But, you know, we want to... there is a bit more to, you know, you feel the plane a bit more when you're doing hand flying instead of autopilot. So I think I need to do this more. And, I mean, that's where the Caribou will come in, because it has no autopilot, which is great for those long flights. There is, okay, final checklist. Autopilot off, seatbelt lights on, flaps to landing position, and bringing airspeed down for landing. Yes, little preview of Martel Air Freight. We're transporting a talkative pine tree today. The Caribou would be great for that. The size of a pine tree you could get in a Caribou. But yes, flying the Caribou in real life is described as exhausting because you are never not hand flying it. And, you know, being a larger aircraft, 500. There's a bit to it. Bit off the centre line, but nothing we can't handle. And this displaced threshold here, so the paved bit before we get to the stripy bit that you're meant to aim for, I can take off the Caribou before we get to the actual runway threshold, starting at the displaced threshold. It's hilarious for a plane that big. I can also land it in that distance. It actually lands shorter than it takes off. And it can do that with 4 ton of cargo. It's so ridiculous, so joyful. I love it so much. So yes, we'll be doing Martel Air. I think we'll do those as round trips. And, you know, some new furniture to Garbo Island Lighthouse will be the first one. Hard there, because I've been flying at the Caribou so much that I'm used to being further off the ground in the cockpit. Flaps up, brakes on. going to 121.0, Martel 11, goodbye. Okay, after landing before arrival checklist, landing lights and strobes off, RPM minimum, condition low idle, inertial separator bypass, seatbelt light remains on. Yes, revised checklist on the to-do list. Attention passengers, we've landed safely in Canberra and the local time is 1:48 in the afternoon. Please remain seated until the plane comes to a complete stop at whatever ridiculous parking spot they give us, because queuing for the exit in an 8-seater makes you look even more ridiculous than normal. Canberra ground, Martel 11 requests taxi to parking. Taxiing to general aviation parking via taxiway Juliet, Bravo, cross runway 30, Bravo, Charlie, Charlie 4, Martel 11. Look, you can be a deplaning hazard, just don't upset Wing Commander Lamington. He doesn't like it when people mess with his doors. And it's not so much you'd be a deplaning hazard if you get up early, it's just that there's nowhere for you to go until I unlock the doors. So here we are back in Canberra Airport, which is the one that I usually fly out of when I'm doing other things, because I enjoy treating it as a home base. At some point I will get the upgrade package for Canberra Airport modelling, which improves some of the buildings, some of the taxiway stuff, and actually makes that terminal look as gaudy as it's supposed to, because those big glass walls are just straight glass. Okay, runway 30, which is inactive and we have permission to cross. One of the weirdest things about taxiing planes when you're used to driving is that all of these lovely markings that you've got are, you're meant to put your central wheels on them instead of trying to stick to one side of them. And they in fact design a lot of things such that the distance from the center line to any obstacles is known, because wingspans. Big wingspan, not so good for taxiing past certain obstacles unless you know how far it is. Now the taxi marker lights are saying that way, but I know that this is taxiway Charlie 4 here. That is part of what needs improvement on the Canberra Airport model. And you can see the ground handle is ready for us over there. So we taxi through the general aviation parking. And there's actually some overflow general aviation parking at Canberra Airport. It's always fascinating to look at as I drive past, because now am I going in this one or the next one? I think I'm going in this one. You can see it out past the end there. It is some more grass parking like we started on today. And it's always interesting to drive past because you look at the wheels of the planes that have been parked for a bit longer and the height of the grass around them. I think part of your pre-flight inspections would actually have to involve a whippersnipper. no, I can't follow the centre line into that parking spot from this side, like the markings are telling me to. Because that person is standing on the centre line. Let's not make chunky salsa. U-turn. Is whippersnipper not the name for that garden trimming device elsewhere? I think I've heard, was it edge trimmer in America? Oh look, another van! Weed whacker. I'm not going to comment on Edger. Weed whacker, that's also quite a fun name. But yes, the Australian serious name for them is whippersnipper. Because, let's face it, it does one thing. It snips. How does it snip? It whip. It snips by whipping. It is a whippersnipper. Yeah, weed whacker. Sure do whack some weed. The person standing on the centre line is in fact trying to guide me into the correct position, but from that side. So, I have also been working on which ground staff I want to remain in the sim. And marshallers are useful and very popular in airports, but like I don't think would actually be used for general aviation like this. Like general aviation, you're expected to just park it yourself. I've managed to get the small pushback pallet jacks to stop coming to my plane because they do not work on the caravan model. Okay, shutdown checklist. Parking brake set. Power lever idle. Yes, turning off the marshallers to stop them being turned into chunky salsa would be useful, I think. And as general aviation, you don't pay somebody for that for GA work. It's expensive. Bleed air heat switch off. ITT range. Am I not at full idle? But ITT range is stable. Prop RPM to feather. Fuel condition, cut. And it winds down. Inertial separator handle to normal. External lights off. Seatbelt light off. Attention passengers, this now concludes our flight from Moruya to Canberra, and we here at Martel Air hope you've enjoyed your time in our tiny skybus. Please wait until I've opened the door and you can calmly deplane in an orderly fashion. Our baggage handling services today will be provided by our wonderful passengers, so thank you for not leaving any of your luggage behind. Any personal belongings left behind as you leave the plane will be assumed to be a present to the co-pilot and enjoyed thoroughly. Thank you for flying Martel Air. We hope you don't die. Okay, internal lights off. Fuel boost off. NG check. And temperature check. Avionics 2 off. Avionics 1 off. Battery switch off. Fuel tank selectors both off. Shutdown checklist complete. And if you wish to deplane in a chaotic fashion, that is between you and whatever strange beings carry your fictional beliefs. We've got a private jet over there making some noise. But as I was rambling before, I'm just going to bump the speed on that up a little. So, the landing gear on the Caravan, and now we can see technically me just sitting in there. This is you wandering around outside the plane. But that really simple landing gear that is just a strut and some aerodynamics. It is really good for not taking up much weight. And then if we come down to the wheel at the front, which is the one that can turn so that we can steer, you can see it's got the more complicated mechanisms there, and also the angly thing at the front is what lets it survive hitting something from the front end and not breaking all of the struts. That will basically just fold and then fold back under the power of the shock absorber springs. And yes, here we have Wing Commander Lamington with me in the background, or my avatar. And of course his name nicely inscribed on the side of the plane, because he deserves his markings there. I've not done too much of a tour of the outside of the plane really. And there's my side of the plane. And if you want to pull your luggage out, it is in this pod underneath just here. So that is the cargo section. And of course we have the cargo door here. And if we just look inside, there's the other luggage section for your carry-on things and small packages. So, in a couple of weeks... Oh yes, your trunk will definitely be in the cargo pod. That jet is very loud and long. In a couple of weeks, I will be... Look, where your luggage is your business. If you don't have it by the time you have left the vicinity of the plane, then the trunk becomes a... Oh, you were not in the cargo. I'm sure that pine tree type cargo goes in the passenger compartment. Oh, trunk. I'm sorry, I was not prepared for tree puns. Wing Commander Lamington, do you have a tree pun to contribute? Wing Commander Lamington would like to contribute the tree pun of bark. At some point, I will declare it time to leave the stream. But as I was about to ramble, actually I'm going to go back in the plane where it's less loud from that jet. You can see why ground handlers wear ear protection. In a couple of weeks, there will be a Saturday where I am not able to stream, and that is because I will be elsewhere, and else century. I will be spending the week at my medieval group's biggest event of the year, so I'll be somewhere around the 13th century and somewhere around Sydney. And my plan is to do a pre-recorded episode for that, which will be the checklist special. So at the start of the before engine start checklist, I keep saying pre-flight inspection, check. But that's not actually the pre-flight inspection. That's just saying, have I done the pre-flight inspection? So, for the pre-recorded episode, where I am nowhere near here, we will have the checklist special, where, because I've managed to find a copy of the Cessna Grand Caravan EX Pilot Operating Handbook, which has the full official checklists, including the pre-flight inspection checklist, I'll be doing the full pre-flight inspection, which involves things in the cockpit to check that all of the systems are as they should be, and a full walk around of the outside of the plane, checking flight surfaces, controls, lights, pitot tubes, and the engine, so I will not be able to do all of the parts of the check properly, but I will walk through them all. The fact that the Microsoft Flight Sim model for the Grand Caravan does not let me open the engine compartment, for example, or, add or remove pitot covers, that will mean that it's not quite as visually precise as it could be, but I will be running through the entire pre-flight inspection checklist just to show why I don't do it on stream every week. It will probably be at least an hour-long episode, depending on how quickly I run through this checklist. But I think, as mentioned, this is the time when I'll be leafing the stream. I could do more tree puns, but I have just been rambling for, nearly 2 hours, when starting with a migraine. So, it's me, and I took that long to notice that trunk was not a luggage thing, but in fact a pine tree thing. I was halfway through telling you that if you leave a trunk on board my plane, it will become the property of Wing Commander Lamington, and quite possibly get fitted out as a travel bed for him. That would be cool. Look, at some point I'll work out how to redo the interior model of this thing, and then there will be chaos. But until that point, I am going to take us to the end card of the stream. And I am going to make sure that I still have the microphone turned on rather than the muted end of stream. But I hope you've enjoyed the stream. I hope you've enjoyed causing chaos in my passenger compartment. I hope that's not a euphemism. And I will hopefully see you next week. Thank you for the company.